Hi, it's Mike from Gear Diary, and here to take a more in-depth look at the Aria 48-track recording studio for the iPad. And I have it set up on my Griffin audio dock. So first thing you look, this is for anyone who's dealt with music or seen a music studio either live or on film somewhere, a fairly familiar interface. You have got sliders that control your volume, and if you notice, perhaps you can see it, right below the project name, which I creatively called New Project 4, is the slider value. So you can change it in fairly small increments, bring it back close to 0, and just let it go. You've got 48 tracks, so these are numbered 1 through, I'll just keep going and keep going and keep going, 48. So those are the main tracks, so those are the things you can record on. Then you have subgroups, so you can actually map all of these different channels to different subgroups, up to 8 of those, and so then you can control those. So if you had a drum set or whatever you're going to mix within there and then you wanted to bring that up and down, that would be the purpose of a subgroup, and then it all goes into a master, and that's your total final output. Within there you have auxiliary inputs or send receives for things like effects loops or something like that, pan left right. You also have up top, you have an effects loop, and that has your expander, equalizer, compressor, and most music these days you just basically make it all loud, compress it all up, and then you're good to go. So you've got a whole channel strip that you can have your sounds routed through any of those effects or none. And let's see what else. You also have your automation for read-write. You've got mute or solo for a track. So mute would be, obviously you don't want to hear it. Solo means that's all you want to hear, and you can change that as well. Again, the slider, and here's where you would affect the different subgroups. You can have up to 8 subgroups. So I'm not going to choose any of that. Next thing on the interface is you've got your slider view, you have a waveform view, you can undo things, then you have a whole menu system. Now the menu system, you can get USA Today breaking news, import audio, add tracks, mix downs. So if you actually went beyond 48 tracks and wanted to mix several tracks down to one, that would be the way you do that. You can import and export, and then you've got a number of settings. In the settings, things like if you want to hear a metronome when you're recording, what your tempo will be, so on and so forth. A bunch of stuff you can do. Also crossed up, like I said, you've got your project name, you've got your recording values, you've got a return to 0, and then here are your basic playback controls. Transport options, one of the ones that I have set is an auto return. So whenever I get anywhere and I press stop, it brings me all the way back to 0. That's not always a convenient thing. Sometimes you want to stop where you are, be able to make some edits, and so on and so forth. But for right now, for recording and that's what I wanted. And again, time format, you've got minutes and seconds, bars and beats can also be very convenient. SMPTE if you're working with film. So another great thing is it tells you things like your CPU, your disk, and then your maximum battery, space, and how much memory it's taking up. So it's actually gives you a fair amount of information, and this is a 48-track recorder, so they're very clear that this is a huge application in terms of its requirements. On the iPad 3, the new iPad, you can do full 48 tracks. Same thing with the iPad 2, you're down to 24 with the iPad 1. So let's see, what else can we take a look at before I actually go and play, because I do have a recorded thing. Let's go to the waveform view. Now if you take a look here, we've got 48 tracks and so on. So I've got 20 tracks recorded on here right now. Now the straight line at the beginning of each is an indication where there's no sound, and then where you can see an active waveform, there is sound. So I didn't really try to make everything exact. So you can see that these two waveforms start at slightly different points, and when you hear the actual audio, you'll be able to hear that they don't exactly overlap in time. So again, you've got a number of overlapping things that I've gone and put one on top of the other. Now I've only done about don't know, 35 seconds or so, but then I can show you something else cool that you can do. So just to show what 20 tracks sounds like to begin with, let's just go ahead and hit play. Now, as it's playing back, you can see that there are a couple tracks. This one's a little bit on the peaky side, so it's distorting a little bit. Others are actually pretty reasonable. If I go back to the slider view, you can see the ones that are hitting red are actually distorting a little bit. That if I was going to take the time, I'd want to bring those down in the mix. So even though it's distorted at the input, I can still deal with that later on in the mix. So, you know, that's a fairly simple, just kind of staccato overlapping sounds. So let's go back to that. Now, if I wanted to take just a segment of track here, whatever I want to do, I'll just select this entire thing. Now it tells me my start and end times, the length, offset. So it's like offset from 0, things like that. You can actually have it fade in and fade out as well. I can have different grid that I'm working to. So if you wanted to move this around and wanted to try to get those two to overlap perfectly, I could actually slide it around a little bit. But I could also take and duplicate that region. So if you're creating a track with a lot of loops, so you want to have the same rhythm going for several minutes and you don't want to sit there and play it all, you do maybe a 32 bar segment, then you loop it for a while. So that's a really convenient way of doing it. You can lock regions, unlock, a bunch of things you can process. You can normalize, condense. Again, these are all standard recording things. If you're working in Pro Tools, I'm not going to begin to compare this really to a full thing like Pro Tools, but it really, in terms of the iPad, does provide a fairly robust tool set. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail for this, but I will say, again, as I showed before, works perfectly with the Griffin Studio, works great now as of the latest update with iRig. So you can have inputs coming from everywhere. You can mix down 48 tracks simultaneously. You can have playing out, although I just had 20 at this point. You could just continue adding on. You can have as much time as your iPad will allow, and it'll work with it. You can mix it down from there into fewer tracks if you need to. You can automate mixes so that you can actually have it record as the slider goes up and down. So if you wanted to bring all these levels up, have them come down, that's definitely an option as well. So this is really an amazing piece of audio studio software that really turns into, right here in front of me, a pretty amazing 48 track mini studio that you have on your iPad. I've never seen anything like it at this level, and certainly for the $50 price tag, it's just stunning for somebody such as myself who's been doing some bit of music for a number of years to see something in this price range. So it's Auria. There'll be a link in the review, and definitely check it out. It's worth looking into. It's Mike from Gear Diary, and thanks for watching.